suppose it's a cold war of sorts potentially that we're entering into with a lot of large dominant players in the market, and then it takes a young Mark Zuckerberg to come through and dominate with a Facebook. So we've reached a stagnation point in search to some extent. Where does personal discovery and social insight fall in all this? Social insight, personal insight. Do you think is there anything beyond search?
Oh, absolutely. You know, the thing that I guess I would say, first of all, you know, I do think that there is a lot in this emerging social web that has yet to be discovered. You know, there is a new paradigm that sort of Facebook is the closest to having discovered. You know, there's something there in the idea of building a social graph and then delivering services that are informed by that graph. And I think that's going to be really interesting. But when I get, you know, what I personally find most exciting today is actually moving away from what we think of as Web 2.0 per se. It's in some of the territory that we're looking at with Make, you know, which is the re-engagement of computing with the physical world. And I think that's actually going to be transformative in a variety of ways. You know, it's going to be things like sort of the sensor revolution and robotics. And it really is very powerful to me that the same techniques that we're using for Web 2.0, you know, for collective intelligence, are the same techniques that they use in artificial intelligence for robots. So I go, okay, so when do devices start getting smart because they're informed by these, you know, collective intelligence algorithms and the data that we're providing? So that's one piece. But there's also, for example, you know, computation applied to genomics. You know, and there's some amazing stuff starting to happen there. And, you know, what kind of social network is there when, you know, the social network is all the people who share the same gene, for example? Or, you know, literally, you know, Craig Venter, who we had at the Web 2.0 Summit, you know, he's one of the two people who's had his entire genome sequenced. He now says he kind of watches, you know, for news about certain of his genes. So, you know, you subscribe to a gene and you say, yeah, give me any news about this part of me, you know? That's
the notion of moving towards a sensory understanding that, to some extent, that the data and the numbers exist, but it's now a matter of putting meaning and understanding onto them. So, is that very much where you see Web 3.0 stroke World 3.0 going?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I guess to me, I think Web 3.0 is sort of a stupid term because Web 2.0 is a stupid term.
You coined it.
Yeah. Well, but we coined it. You know, it's funny because it really was a term that was coined at a particular time and for a reason that's not at all what it appeared to be. You know, it wasn't really about a version number for the web. It was really about the second coming of the web. You know, everybody said the web is dead. You know, we'd had the dot-com bust. You know, when we looked at, you know, in our business in 2003 when we came up with the term, it's like half of the people at our conferences were out of work. You know, the dot-com, you know, bust was still going. And we said, how do we reignite confidence that there's still something here? You know, so it was really trying to tell a story about the second coming of the web. And it does look like a version number.
You know, it led to its own problems there. I mean, in terms of taking where we are now, we're in Berlin now. Everything is still very Palo Alto centered to some extent. And Web 2.0 has spawned this desperation for financing and funding, which may not necessarily be a driver of innovation. Do you think that's tied into this as a concept?
Yeah, I do think that, you know, we're entering kind of a second kind of bubble, although it's less intense than the first because it's low capital. You know, most of these Web 2.0 startups are not consuming the kind of money that went into the first dot-com craziness. You know, you don't have the people spending millions of dollars on Super Bowl ads because they don't have the millions of dollars to spend. And the VCs with really large funds are off, you know, chasing new things like biofuels, you know.
What's the fine market? I don't know.
But there is definitely a lot of froth and people who I think don't really understand Web 2.0. I mean, there's certainly an aspect, you know, where it is about building these lightweight internet applications that get lots of users. But I think that, you know, more profoundly, it is about the shift of power in the computer industry from software to data. And I think that people haven't really understood that yet. And the most interesting Web 2.0 companies are creating data assets. You know, if you look at something like, say, you know, Flickr or Delicious, they're valuable because they became repositories of really useful data, and you know, on a smaller, you know, different scale. You know, you look at a company like low profile but really interesting. You know, like I can't remember the name right now. The guys who do CDDB, you know, in Berkeley. You know, this is sort of like, this is a driver for every music application on the planet. You know, and these guys have a database of CD track names. You know, and that kind of, and I think we're going to find new areas where there is sort of unexploited data, and that's kind of what Facebook tapped into, this idea of building the social graph as sort of a data asset.
Interesting.